topic this afternoon is about children's mental health. And we've got some really interesting presenters today to talk with you about children's mental health. We did have some information in the description guide that it will get to that, but we've got some good speakers to lay a foundation about mental health, and then we will have more of question and answer time. I want you to feel free to engage with our panelists this afternoon, and you will be having plenty of time to talk with them and have them answer your questions and some fundamental questions you might have about mental health. But the approach today is a little bit different with a couple of our speakers, because we have some very experienced speakers regarding mental health issues for children, and want to tell you just a little about them. Jan Dick is Director of Family and Children's Services, and Jan has worked with adoptions and child welfare for, I don't want to say how many years because I don't want to embarrass Jan.
Almost 40.
So she has done a lot of work with the Department of Children's Services, its prior governmental names, many contract agencies, and we greatly appreciate all of the work that Jan has done, and she's now serving as a therapist, working directly with children. One thing I found out about Jan is that she went to Bethel College, but not the one in Tennessee. She went to a Bethel College in Kansas, and that's something she has slightly alike with our next presenter, who's going to be John Ebert. John went to a Bethel College, but I don't think that one was in Kansas, in Minnesota. There's a lot of Bethel colleges, but John is a psychologist, and he works with the Vanderbilt Center of Excellence. He is a graduate of Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois, but go Packers, right? That is his team. Kathy Joyner, I don't know where she went to college. Absolutely. Very good. We're happy to hear that, Kathy. Kathy has worked a similar number of years in child welfare, as has Jan Dick. And I think, Kathy, that you've pretty much been with OmniVision since its inception. She is Director of Children's Programs at OmniVision. And OmniVision, as you probably know, serves therapeutic foster care, in-home services, works with adoptions, array of services. Now, what you might not know is that OmniVision also provides supported residential for adult mentally retarded individuals through the Department of Intellectual Disabilities. And their former, did I say that correctly?
You did.
Good. Their former director has gone over to be their commissioner, Mr. Henry, and we're thrilled with his work now in government with the Department of Intellectual Disabilities. That's Kathy Joyner. Millie Sweeney is with us today. Millie went to Mississippi State, and she got her master's in clinical work there, and she has done clinical work here with children's services, youth villages, and now she's working on a very unique program that she's going to offer some insight with family support services. She works directly with families who have children with mental health needs to help teach them how to support their children. So she is running that entire advocacy program. It's been a great benefit. And I don't know if you know about Tennessee Voices. How many of you are familiar with Tennessee Voices? Don't know anything about it? A few people are? Yes, Tennessee Voices is a wonderful advocacy organization for children with mental health needs. And it was started by Tipper Gore. And she had a vision, and she set that vision free. And their director, has Charlotte been here since its inception?
She was the second director, but she's been there almost 20 years.
Charlotte Bryson, who is a fabulous advocate for children, along with Millie and the whole group. And Debbie Dukes is also with us today. Debbie Dukes is with Volunteer State Health Plan, who is part of the managed care company that serves the children in custody, and they also serve a great number of other children who are on TennCare through TennCare Select. Debbie has been an advocate in Community Mental Health Center. She started out as a special education instructor. I'm clarifying that today. I introduced her as someone who started out in special ed, and she said, no, special ed instruction. So we've kind of gotten that straight. But among other things, I know that Debbie cannot go back to the Department of Motor Vehicles in Dunn, North Carolina. But Debbie is a wonderful advocate, and we appreciate working with her in the services that TennCare Select seeks to provide to the children that we're serving. And you may have we'll have a little information on how to contact them. Make sure you have that information. So we're going to start off this morning, or this afternoon, today, with Jan Dick, who is going to speak with us about her passion regarding what you need to know about children who are entering foster care and what their needs are.
Thank you. I was a little bit worried that I would be sort of the Debbie Downer of this presentation because my job is to begin to define some of the problems. These are some of the issues that children have when they enter foster care that ultimately contribute to their mental health needs. And I think that it's important to recognize that all of us who are in the world of foster care and adoption are here because we want to make children's lives better. How hard it can be for us sometimes, and how necessary it is to have the courage to look into the face of loss and to the trauma that is caused by and causes the loss. These are painful areas, but we need to understand how the related dynamics of loss and trauma impact our children's behavior, their emotional needs, and ultimately their mental health needs. Now loss, whoops, okay, I'm just going to put all these up there. Let's get them all on there. Okay, loss is always devastating, especially for a child. But if there is a supportive, loving context for grieving, it can be managed. And there's a process for moving through loss. It begins, of course, with deep pain, moves through acceptance, moves through changing from an active engagement with a person to memories of that person, moves to developing new relationships, and finally going on with healthy development. That takes a while, and it certainly does sometimes happen for our kids in care. But what makes it possible to move through that process is that deep supportive relationship that a child may have. Now, for children in care, this is just a whole lot more complicated, especially when they enter care and they don't have that supportive relationship. Sort of the very nature of their situation is that they're in a brand new place. They don't know how long they're going to be there. They may be cut off from any of that supportive relationship that would help them move through the grief. The other part of it that's complicated is that children's loss is accompanied by separation distress and by trauma, and all those really deep, unanswerable questions. Often when I work with children, I ask them to respond to the question, if I could get the answer to one question about myself and my life, it would be. Now I trick them. First I say, if I were a bird, or if I were a color, what color would I be? If I were a book, what would my title be? If I were a song, what would my title be? And eventually move into this question. If I could get the answer to one question about myself and my life, it would be, and these are the types of answers I get from kids. What happened to me when I got beat up and people threw stuff at me? Why did my parents treat me the way they did? And this is the most devastating. Why did they throw me away? A couple more. Why did my mom go off and leave me? And then for a child who's 10 years old, in 10 whole years, why has nobody been able to take care of me? These are the deep questions, and a lot of these kids have been separated for years, but still given the opportunity to answer their questions, that's where they go. The other thing that makes it complicated for kids in foster care is their grief gets put on hold because they don't know what to grieve. They don't know. Are they going to go back to their parents? Maybe. Stay with their foster parents? Maybe. They ever going to see their brothers and sisters again? Maybe. Will I ever see my parents again? Who knows? And so when grief is put on hold because of all these maybes, it's hard to even start. So what we're looking at, because of this combination of unresolved and unresolvable loss, and the traumas that the children have had when they come into care, we are looking at traumatic grief. And that is the combination of the grief that is unresolved and which is deeply intertwined with the trauma that children have. Now, trauma, the definition of trauma, is that it is a real or perceived threat to survival. And I think it's really important to say a perceived threat to survival, because a child that gets locked in a closet, if they're 3, is probably not going to die. But that child may think they will. They may be pretty convinced at their developmental level that nobody is ever going to come back and get them. And so even an adult may say, it was only overnight. You know, they weren't going to die. But from that child's perspective, that was a threat to survival. Oops, don't gesture with the microphone. I learned that. Okay. So this is trauma, and so many of our kids have experienced it. These are some of the layers of trauma. We're talking about prenatally, even a child that is born to a mother that is under stress can experience prenatal trauma. If there's nobody there to take care of the child, that's trauma. If there's emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, that's trauma. And if there's a significant separation or loss or abandonment, that is trauma too. It is interesting to me that when I've worked with kids and do assessments, a lot of them point out that last one, that significant separation, as the worst thing that's ever happened to them. They may have been sexually abused, they may have been horribly physically abused, but that separation is the most traumatic. So it has a tremendous power. Trauma affects every aspect of a child's existence. It impairs their brain and skill development. It leads to loss of trust, loss of faith, loss of safety, and loss of connection. So those are the big losses. Those are the big existential losses. The thing about trauma is that it becomes encoded in the brain, the body, and the sort of the nervous system. Children's responses to trauma are grounded in the brain's instinctive survival response to situations of deprivation, threat, and danger. That response becomes a part of who they are. And there are 4 key ways that our children respond to trauma. One is fear. Children react to fear in one of 3 ways: fight, flight, or freeze. In fact, we all respond in one of those ways. If you think about yourself in your most stressed place, you will find that you tend to be a fighter, you take action, or you tend to fly, you avoid the situation, you get out of there, or you totally freeze, like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Our children are the same way, but it comes out for them in day-to-day life long after the trauma in some of their behaviors. A fight child may be a hyper-aroused child, the aggressive child, have difficulty concentrating, be the angry child. This is what shows up in your home, even though the trauma may have happened a long time ago. A child with flight reactions, okay, they're the child that withdraws. They avoid, they isolate. They're leaving the situation. They are your runaway kids. Under stress, they'll take off. A child with a freeze reaction is very shut down. The more you try to talk to them or engage them when they're in some sort of a stress situation, the less they are able to respond. They get numb, they get spacey, they're not there anymore. Another reaction to trauma is disorder of memory. Traumatic memories get stored in the brain, in the consciousness sort of incompletely, and they are not always available to conscious memory. But there may be a trigger in the child's experience that creates a trauma reaction. Triggers might be such a thing as a smell. The smell of alcohol might trigger a traumatic memory for a child. The smell of a certain kind of aftershave. A place like the bathroom, a time of day like 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they're lonely. These remind a child of a time that they might have been traumatized. And sometimes a child has a full flashback and remembers the entire trauma experience. Sometimes they just feel weird and they feel uneasy and they get more irritable in that situation and they don't really know why. So this also affects children's behavior. Many, many kids get into trouble because they don't know how to handle their feelings. Because of the trauma, some kids have just gone numb. It's much easier to shut down, not cry if they're being traumatized, just be a little robot. And so, or the other thing is just to be completely explosive. So children are often either all or nothing in their behavioral reactions. Finally, the biggest one is that children who have been traumatized experience closeness as terrifying. When they have trusted somebody before, they have been hurt. When they have loved somebody, they have been left or wounded. So the child who has been traumatized, they need more than anything to trust and be parented, but that is the thing that they're most afraid of. They reject and fight the thing they need the most. What these children, and you can see how all of these trauma and loss reactions can create behavioral problems at home, behavioral problems at school, emotional needs, and therefore mental health issues. What these children need from professionals is to go beyond the behavior. They need the professionals to understand, to do assessments that look at underlying issues. They need professionals to have specialized training to deal with trauma and attachment issues. We're talking about going beneath the behavior. They need time. They need frequency. And they need somebody to support the parents. What children need from you is to be able to hear their story. They need you to be that safe relationship that will not give up on them. This is not easy. These children need something from us. They need us to promise to help keep them safe, physically and emotionally, and they need us to help them learn to trust. That's all. Small order. What children need also is therapy that is appropriate to their situation. They need attachment-oriented therapy or they need trauma-oriented therapy. For the most part, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is a very effective mode of therapy for children with trauma, but they need parents to be involved. This kind of therapy is only effective for a child if a parent reinforces it, if a parent hears their story. Bottom line, what kids need is just a few simple words. They need us to remember to be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind.
Thank you. Are there any immediate pressing questions for Jan before we move on? Thank you, Jan. I think that's a great foundation. I think you all already know about the effects of the children that you're serving, what they bring to you, but it is helpful to go through that and think it through as we're thinking about how then do we respond with mental health needs for children. John Ebert is a psychologist at the Center of Excellence, as I indicated. How many of you are familiar with the Center of Excellence? Some of you may have had a child that has been evaluated. There may be referrals made for children who are in or at risk of custody, who have a higher complexity or a puzzlement to their behavior, or services simply not readily available in the community. There are 5 throughout the state, and Vanderbilt serves the folks in the Middle Tennessee area. They also review cases with the Department of Children's Services. But John today is going to talk about what goes on when we have all this emotion in the family and we're all carrying these red balls?
So I'm going to build off of what Jan talked about in terms of, my voice is loud, I want to bring this down. The need for you all and how these kids need bigger, wiser, stronger parents. They need bigger, wiser, stronger caregivers to get involved, but there's a cost to that. We get thrown a lot of balls, and I'm going to talk about what these balls are, and we're going to illustrate it. Traumatized children, one of the first things that we know about them, their emotional systems. When you see this word affect regulation or self-regulation, it just means their emotional systems. Teicher, who's a researcher at Harvard, found that lack of capacity for emotional self-regulation, or the ability to control emotion, is probably the most striking feature of chronically traumatized children. And these are the kids you know. Well, how does our emotional system get set up? And why is it so important? And what role do you all play in that? Well, these researchers said that emotion regulation is so important, it's probably one of the most foundational pieces in child development. In fact, they said the whole of child development is the enhancement of self-regulation, emotional regulation, emotional development. And so one of the things that we found is that there's kind of these core system requirements in a parent to be able to help install our emotional system. We talk about co-regulation, reflective parenting, interactional awareness parenting, working through disruptions and repairs, what a really important piece, and positive relational reunion. What do I mean by co-regulation? Well, co-regulation means that as children's emotions are developing, there's a partnership between a child and a parent or a caregiver. I want you to notice this. The bottom represents the age. The blue bar represents how much parents manage children's emotion and how much the child does. When I had a little one in the morning, so suppose Jan is my infant child, crying in the middle of the night, screaming, the distress leaves her, comes to me, and I'm all of a sudden woke up, my hair's all over the place. I'm holding this ball of distress. Oh, okay, I need to go back to my child, help, okay, it's okay, soothe, help calm them down. Now, you'll notice that over time, through many, many interactions with that ball, the child is able to tolerate more and hold more of the emotion. In fact, adolescents, you know these kids. These are the kids who go, I can manage all these emotions, but they're doing everything they can to enlist you and helping you out. And so it's kind of this weird tug of war, like, no, I can do it, no, you do it, no, I can do it. And so there's this movement of emotion. So one of the things that's important to know about this is that when kids have feelings, especially the kids who don't have developed emotional systems, they rely on you a significant amount of time. They outsource their emotion to you. So a kid comes home, they're frustrated from their experience at school, and they're mad at a teacher. They come home and they start cursing all over the place. That's their way of then giving you the emotion so that you can tolerate it. Excuse me. We have fun here. So all of a sudden now I'm holding the child sends out the ball through their behavior, and now all of a sudden now I'm holding this anger. I wasn't angry when I got home from work. Something kind of, all this cursing is making me angry. So it requires that the adult realize that the feelings that they're feeling was really the child just giving it to them, just like she gave me this ball. And so much of what we do relies on our own adult reactions. Have you ever felt like you were in a game of hot potato emotionally with your kids? I know I have. Just constant passing back and forth. No, it's your fault. I shouldn't be doing this. This is yours. And so it becomes very contentious. I know it's silly, but actually picturing this ball has helped me recognize, this is the ball. This is what's the kid's feeling. This is what's going on. This is what they're having trouble managing, and I'm holding it. I need to work with them to help them hold this and to help them manage it. So I'm going to move on to this idea of reflective parenting. Reflective parenting simply is this. It's this ability in the moment to kind of reflect and say, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. This is what's going on. This is such an important piece. You do it automatically, but with traumatized kids, you want to do it even more. Reflect, think. Okay, this is what this kid's making me feel right now. Oh, this is why I'm so resentful. This is why things are so difficult.
This is why we can't hear you.
She's co-regulating with me right now around my audio. So reflective functioning is really about us being able to pull back and think and go, this is what's going on. Because if we can do that, we can kind of engage our kids in a more effective manner. That's why it's healthy. Interactional awareness. It's knowing not only in your reflection of what's going on, but it's also thinking about, now if I do this with the kids, or this particular kid, this is how they might think, feel, or act as a result of my interaction. So this is another just important piece in the attachment relationship, is your ability to have that awareness and think things through about how your actions affect the kid's action. Does it help them soothe, or does it help escalate the process, escalate the conflict? Work through disruptions and repair. If there's one thing from my talk today that you all want to be good at, it's this piece. We anticipate and understand that smooth interactions between children and the caregivers are often disrupted and need repair. It's the ability to repair a disruption that's the essence of a secure attachment, not the lack of disruptions. I always show this analogy to my families when we're doing work together. When you tear muscle, you disrupt it. You use rest and nutrition to gain strength, and that's a positive thing. But the irony of that is it leads you to engaging more disruption. And so relationships are really like that as well. Conflicts plus working through is repair equals strength, and that's positive. I've never seen a family go, you know what, us working through that, that was a terrible experience. They've always felt a positive experience as a result of that, which means that they can re-engage conflicts. This is John Gottman, who's an expert in marriage, but he also works with kids, and I just want to highlight, emotion coaching parents do not deny or dismiss a child's distress, but view negative experiences as opportunities for intimacy. Basically what he's saying is, build on the disruption and the repair. See it as an opportunity. I know in my work, I am more and more looking for opportunities to work through disruptions and repairs, not avoid them. Finally, facilitate a positive relational reunion. The process of re-experiencing a positive emotion or affect following negative experiences allow the child and youth to learn that negative emotion or affect can be tolerated and that relational stress can be regulated. Relational movement from kind of being misattuned to being attuned again. What a great thing. Just remember, when you're doing these healthy things, co-regulation, interactional awareness, kind of the reflective functioning, the disruption and the repair, allowing for that positive relational reunion, it starts to install their emotional system. But be patient, it takes time. You know those progress bars during your installation? It's very much like that. It takes repeated attempts over and over to work through with kids in that way. Couple tips. When you get that hot ball, what do? Well, first of all, you want to kind of think about not falling on two extremes. One of them is pouring everything you have into understanding, but not expecting change. These are the situations when you kind of give in. You just go, oh, what's it worth? I'm not even going to deal with this. Go ahead and do it. The problem is that doesn't build the emotional system. It delays it. It actually puts it off. So this is one extreme you don't want to do when you're holding a ball of angry. But we don't want to go to the other extreme either. We don't want to just expect change. You know what? Stop. Don't do it again. This is your last chance. Notice, I'm doing everything about expecting change. There isn't a lot of understanding. And I'll just tell you, in my work with these kids, and I do groups, and I'm constantly challenged by this, is bring the balance. Understand and expect change. That's the way you give it back to kids in a way like, here, I think this is yours. Hey, Tim, you know, you can't come to group and curse like that, but I understand it was a tough day. Understand, expect change. It gives the ball back to them in a regulated, in a calm manner. And you can stay strong with them and not feel like you're giving in. But I'll tell you, doing this takes a lot of work on your part. It takes a lot of awareness on your part about what's going on with you. Finally, I just want to recap. Know how you are feeling and cool the emotional ball. When you get that ball, okay, today I'm feeling angry, feeling frustrated. Where did this come from? I wonder if the kids are struggling. Okay, I need to go back to them. Instead of chucking it back at them, I'm going to kind of go, hey, I think something's not working between us, and we need to sit down and talk about it. Cool the ball. That's part of the process. Balance reactions with understanding and expectation of change. Disruptions in the relationship are opportunities for repair. That's the greatest take-home message there. That's liberated my work because I don't feel like I have to work to not make mistakes. Instead, build on the mistakes as opportunities. Hey, we didn't get this right. We didn't understand each other. Let's work through that. And then finally, you are a vital part of building the emotional strength. You, not just therapists, not just case managers and programs. It's you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. John used a lot of words, but describing to us, when I mean words, big ones. We heard some big ones today that I don't hear every day. But describing to us in a very simple way, I think, about that emotion and how that is carried over. Does anyone have any questions for John? Can you think of any examples in your own relationship and family that come to mind when you think about tossing that hot potato back and forth? I think I did one of those this week. I think I got that hot potato. All right. If we don't have any burning questions, we'll move on to Kathy Joyner. And Kathy has worked, as we indicated earlier, with parents for many years and is passionate about assisting parents in understanding their role in the healing process.
Thanks.
Would you like the podium?
I'm good without
Okay.
that, and I tell you what, I'll let you do this part.
Okay, that'd be
How about
great.
that? I think
That's
that'll
great.
help me a lot. I'm not sure I can manage the microphone, the papers, and the little clicker thing. So I appreciate the help. Foster children typically come to your homes most of the time with a few personal belongings. But what we're hearing today is they also come to you with their trauma. And their trauma is kind of in, what I like to call an invisible suitcase. And that invisible suitcase is packed full of thoughts and feelings that children have grown to believe because of the traumatic experiences that they've had in their lives. Let me tell you what I mean about the invisible suitcase. You know, children that have been traumatized have very definite feelings about themselves and who they are. They have very definite feelings about how they feel about the caregivers who have been caring for them. They also have very definite feelings about how they feel about the world in general. You guys are the experts. So how do kids that come into your home feel about themselves? What do you usually see in those kids? What are their thoughts about themselves? Low self-esteem. And so it's feelings like, I'm not worthy, I'm not any good to anybody. What other kinds of feelings do kids have? Oh, good one. Yeah, it's my fault. Yeah, it's control issues, or maybe everything in my life is out of control. You know, kids feel like they're worthless. You know, they feel like that they're unlovable. So this invisible suitcase is just chock full of how kids have negative feelings about themselves. The second thing is, how do you think the kids that have been traumatized feel about the adults who care for them? What are their thoughts about the adults? Absolutely. The very people who in the world are supposed to care for me and protect me and take care of me may very well have been the ones who abused me. So absolutely, lack of trust. What else about the adults who care for them? What else do kids think about those adults? Do you think they feel like they can trust those people? Absolutely. They've been let down many times. Yeah, what else? Do you think that they feel like adults are going to be accepting of them or supportive of them? You know, maybe they come to us where they've had a history of being rejected by the very people, again, that are supposed to be caring for them. How do you think they feel about the world, just the whole world in general? What do you think they think about the world? Oh, absolutely. It's against them. What else? the world is uncaring, the world is a safe place, it's a cruel place. So that's what I mean when I talk about this invisible suitcase. It's how they feel about themselves, how they feel about the adults who care for them, and how they feel about the world in general. Now, you as a foster parent have a wonderful opportunity to help kids unpack that suitcase, okay? In fact, you have the greatest opportunity of anybody that's working on the child's team. One of the reasons for that is a lot of our kids go to therapy, and that's wonderful and that's necessary. But if I'm counting up the hours that are spent in a week, a therapist session is usually what? 40 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe 50. Well, I didn't do the math, but you guys as foster parents are spending a bazillion hours of time, and compared to the time that a therapist has to work with the children. So you have a role as a caregiver, definitely. And what that means is all the different kinds of parenting things. That's buying the groceries, doing the laundry, making sure that the allowance money is in the backpack. It's putting the Band-Aids on the boo-boos. It's all that stuff that you do and that all of us do as parents. But you have such a unique opportunity to have a treatment role with the children. And what it is that you do is you help children repack that suitcase. I like to think of foster parents as agents of change. You may not think of your home as a treatment setting, but that is exactly what it is. It's a treatment setting because you have an opportunity to change what kids believe about themselves, about adults, and about the world in general. So let me give you some examples of ways that we can repack the suitcase. And I have to admit, I got kind of carried away in this, so we're not going to have time to talk about every one of these. But I just want to give you an idea of the role that you play in helping heal the wounds of children that have been traumatized. So let me pick out a couple of them. The first one up there is that when you provide love and affection and care for the kids, you are working at that very first one we talked about, helping kids feel that they are lovable. Dadgummit, I'm going to take that feeling of being unlovable out of that invisible suitcase, and I'm going to repack it with feelings that you are lovable and worthy and that you are capable. Does that make sense to you guys about unpacking? When I give consequences for behavior, I am helping children learn to accept responsibilities for their actions. When I am able to stay calm in the midst of a behavior meltdown. Now, you guys know what a behavior meltdown is, right? Oh, yeah, you've got one in your mind. I can tell y'all are thinking about one that happened maybe this morning. Yeah, but when we're able to stay calm in the midst of a behavior meltdown, we are absolutely role modeling for kids how to manage and express their emotions in a very appropriate way. When we give positive consequences for good behavior, we again are helping children learn that they are valuable and they are capable individuals. When we play with our kids, that sounds like a pretty simple, kind of thing, and you may not think of that as kind of a treatment intervention that you're doing with kids, but we know simply sitting down and playing with kids is a way for kids to learn about problem solving, communication, and social skills. Okay, how much time do I have?
You're good.
I'm doing good, okay. And you notice at the very top of the slide, I'm talking about repacking. And it's not, something that can happen overnight. You've got to continually, almost every day, every hour of every day, work on repacking. I love the first one. When you involve kids that come into your home in all your family rituals, let's say that you sit down at the table and when you say grace, you hold hands. And that's a family ritual. Let's say that when somebody in your family is celebrating a birthday, there's one special candle that for years has always gone on the kid's birthday cake. So when you involve the foster kids in your home who come to you from, very traumatic experiences, you are helping kids develop a sense of security and a sense of loyalty simply by involving them in your family rituals. Another one that I like up there, when you simply do what you say you will do, how does that begin to change what kids feel about their caregivers? You are proving to them that you are somebody that can be trusted. And it's the simple things. If I say to you, I'm going to pick you up at 3 o'clock this afternoon after school, dadgummit, I'm going to do that because we know that is so important for these kids. If I say that next Saturday we're going to go shopping for the soccer shoes, that you need to play, sports, I'm going to do that. Does that make sense to you guys? Because remember, what they've learned about adults through their traumatic experiences is that they can't be depended upon. And so for you as foster parents, it's incredibly important for you to follow through and do what you say you're going to do. I'll go to the next one because I could talk forever. We're talking about continuing to repack. Let's see, a couple of those that I like and a couple that Jan and John mentioned. The third one up there. When you help a kid calm down, you are actually impacting the stress hormones that are being released throughout their body. You're helping to slow that down. You're helping that brain to kind of change, kind of what that brain is doing. And you may not realize that, but simply responding in a calm way to kids helps them learn to regulate, and that's what John was talking about, helps them to regulate their very body and what is happening in terms of their brain activity. I love the next to the last one, humor and activities. That's one of my favorite ones. I'm not really proud of this story, but one night a foster parent called me because a 14-year-old girl was having one of those meltdowns. And so I was so proud of what all I was doing. I thought I was really being very clinical and, calm. And I was calm until the lamp went flying by my ear because the child had thrown it at me. So we tried to do a physical restraint. I'm not real proud of this work now. Remember I said that. So I'm trying to manage the girl's legs, the foster parent's trying to manage the girl's arm. And all at once we all burst out laughing because we thought, what a silly scene, that we've created. And so being able to sometimes interject just the sense of humor, I think can catch kids off guard. The Life book, one of Jan and I's very favorites. I know that we talk to you guys all the time about life books. But what you're doing by the Life book, it's not just a scrapbook. It's not just about the pictures and the report cards and the things that you put in there. What you are helping children begin to understand is, who am I and why am I here? Do I still have one more? Oh, I do. I'm going to have to let you read this one in the handout. But I hope it makes sense about the invisible suitcase and about one of your important jobs is to start repacking that suitcase with positive feelings about themselves, the adults that they work with, and then the world in general. And I think there's one more slide in closing. I love this. Foster parents, foster change. That is exactly what we are asking you to do with these children. Now, I wish I was smart enough to say all of this was ideas I had, but I stole them. And so up there is where if you wanted to look for some more information on what you can do as a parent to work with traumatized children, you can look at that same resource. Somebody mentioned earlier that, helping children change those thoughts and feelings is a journey. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's something that you got to work on over and over and over again. But I'm here to tell you that foster parents make differences in the lives of the kids that they work with. And I want to tell you, it is an honor to be in a room of people who work with the thousands of kids that are in the custody of the state of Tennessee. I've never been a foster parent. Don't think I could do your job. And so I can't, sit down without telling you how much I honor you and tell you it is a privilege to have an opportunity to talk with you all about the work you do. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. We're going to take just a few minutes and have some questions because I have a burning question. Some of y'all may have one, but I've got one. Now, they've been talking about trauma, and Kathy mentioned the brain. And I've heard through the past several years about how trauma actually physically affects the brain, does something to the brain, and then we have to help children build new pathways. Am I getting it kind of close? Can somebody talk about that? We've got a microphone over there, and John is shaking his head. So if you will hand him, because this, the fake cameras that are here that aren't filming anything can hear.
Jan really laid out the fight, flight, or freeze response. Our emotional brain, which is at the center, we know it's kind of like when you take the fist and you put it right in the middle of the brain. It's called our amygdala. And really that part of our brain for kids who've been through trauma, it becomes almost overdeveloped, oversensitive. And the front part of our brain here helps us really almost handcuff that part of the brain. And we know that kids who come from traumatic histories have kind of this part of the brain that's overdeveloped, like they react very strongly and emotionally to things that aren't even kind of risky to them or scary, or things that should be to all of us very safe, become very disruptive for them. They go into the fight, flight, or freeze response. And this front part of the brain, which allows us to really kind of keep all that in check, doesn't develop either. And so those are some of the things from a brain development perspective that through good relationships and healthy attachments, those parts of the brain kind of come back up to speed. So there's really a flexibility with it. And so if you all are able to kind of stay with them and help them through that process, both parts of both of those brain systems then begin to kind of come into form. There was also a reference about hormones and the stress response. That whole neurohormone system gets very disrupted during early development. So those are just a few thoughts. I don't know, Jan, if you want to say.
It's complicated and yet profoundly simple at the same time. The basic job of the brain is to keep the organism alive. And so one of the very first parts of the brain that develops is this amygdala. And its job is to be an early warning system. And if the person is threatened in any way, it sends out this big shot of adrenaline and cortisol, a big stress hormone that puts the body on high alert. And that's where the fight, flight, or freeze. The body, you forget about hunger, you forget about anything except I've got to react to this danger to keep myself safe. And that's a hormonal response. There's another part of the brain, as John mentioned, called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is the one that says, wait a minute, you're not in danger anymore, you can calm down. Like, for example, if you're walking through the woods and there's something on the ground and you go, it's a snake, and your whole body goes into fight, or freeze mode, whichever you choose. And you may take off or stand there like an idiot or try to beat it over the head with a stick. And your amygdala is the part that goes, wait a minute, that's just a stick. That's not a snake. You're not in danger anymore. You can calm down. You're going to be okay. Well, it's a typical reaction for people to have stress response and then the amygdala calm them down. But for a child who is being either ignored or hurt, they get that stress response so often that that shot of hormone actually damages the capacity of the amygdala to calm the system down. And that's why our children are often living in a state of high alert. They spend their lives like you do if you have to walk through a dark parking lot alone at night. When you're on guard, our kids spend their lives on guard because their brain is actually forgotten how to calm down. And that's where some of the dysregulation happens, and this is why we have to help them so much calm down, because their brains just haven't, they're out of the habit, they don't know how to do that at this point.
So,
And I always think about what it's like for a child to be living life that way. You know, we wonder why they're irritable. It's just an awful place to be.
so Jan, can their brain heal?
Yes, it can. I mean, I know that sometimes when we talk about how trauma affects the brain, on the one hand, it helps us understand what's going on with our kids, because it's like, well, no wonder they just can't quit it, because we ask them to. But on the other hand, it can be very discouraging, except research has shown that you absolutely can retrain the brain. And that's where, you know, we've talked about some of the things that you do, that co-regulating, like Kathy said, speaking in a calm voice. There are a lot of things you can do, and the brain can redevelop in a different direction. Anybody else want to add to that?
You know, I was just going to add that, you know, the brain's made up of all of these, now this is the kindergarten level, okay? The, you know, brain's made up of all of these cells, and based of our experiences, you know, these cells connect in different ways. And, you know, I think some of the new research in our field is how, you know, you can actually look at brain scans and see differences in the brain development of a child who's had repeated trauma and the brain of a child who has not. And so we are literally reshaping the pathways that have connected because of the kids' trauma. And that, again, is by the praise that we give them, by role modeling appropriate ways to interact, by being calm, by not letting kids draw us into what I like to call the dance, you know, and responding in kids in different ways than they're used to adults, you know, responding. But again, I'm not sure that foster parents get the credit sometimes for the work that you do in changing the very way kids' brains development. That's a heavy responsibility, but that is, I guess, something for us to thank you for in terms of the work that you do with the kids.
Does anyone have any questions? Because I have a follow-up question. Maybe you're thinking, but I'm thinking. You both, John and Jan, mentioned that it takes time and the patience. And I have a sense that many of you get up praying for patience in the morning. But so what is the time factor? And I'm sure that varies, but can you talk about the time that is needed for healing?
I think you kind of primed the answer to the question. It does take time. In addition to what everyone has shared, there's a statement in the basic neuroscience that says neurons that fire together wire together. And so if you have a child who have neural development where a hand coming at them to slap them or attack them or to make sexual advances at them, they're wiring neurologically. Relationships are dangerous, risky, and harmful and scary and are going to take advantage of me. So when you all come into play, you begin firing a new picture, a new experience. This male is here to support me, not to touch me. Those are new neurons in the brain. This person's here to help me, not hit me. So I think the time frame is really across the board. You can have some kids that jump quickly into healthy attachments and functioning, and it's a great thing. Gosh, it didn't have to be this long, drawn-out, complicated process. And some kids, it's so complex and complicated, it just takes time, sometimes a long time. And so we always talk about the key to working with this particular population is just perseverance. It's not coming in with one big dump truck of love, so to speak. It's about coming back over and over again. It is.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to give a time frame, but I think we talked about in our workshop this morning, for children like this, the most important thing to do is to establish a relationship with them. And all of these suitcases, things that we talked about, are building trust, establishing that relationship. That is more important than managing their behavior or anything else. So that every day your goal is to do something that builds a little bit of trust between you. And sometimes progress is simply they can stay in your home and not have to blow out. You might not feel close to them, they might not feel close to you, but you can tolerate each other. And sometimes that's the first step. And then the next step might be you might actually find that you like each other, and this child may let down their guard a little bit and a little bit. But the important thing, and as Kathy said, you're the agent of healing. You're the one that needs to find the support, and we all owe you the support so that you can keep going, because you're doing a whole lot of giving and not necessarily getting anything back. And part of our job, I think, is to help you see you really are making a difference. It is working. It is important. It is absolutely critical and life-giving for these kids.
Thank you. Why don't we take, we have until 4:30 this afternoon, and so we've reached a little around the halfway mark of that. So why don't we take about a 10-minute break for comfort, if you all like, and we'll come back, and Millie Sweeney is going to talk to us a little bit more regarding the issue of self-care for parents. We're ready to hear from Millie Sweeney this afternoon. As we mentioned earlier, Millie is with Tennessee Voices, and they have a special program that helps supports parents who are raising children that have mental health struggles or challenges. And so Millie is going to come and share with us some tips for foster parents and really all parents who are raising children, especially those that have special challenges.
Thank you. I want to make sure I get this microphone right. Thank you for having me. My job is a little bit different than the other people you've heard from. I'm with a family organization called Tennessee Voices for Children, and the majority of our employees are parents. Parents who have had foster children, parents who have had biological children, grandparents, even some youth that have been through the system and now are reaching out to help others. So what I want to talk with you about is advocacy, first of all, because as a foster parent, you have not only the roles that I believe Kathy talked about, the caregiver, the treatment provider, but you also are an advocate for the child that is placed in your home or the youth that's placed in your home. For some reason or other, there's a variety of reasons, that child's parent, biological parent, isn't there to be their voice. And so that's when it is your role to be that voice. You have to look to their rights and to their needs. You've got to be the voice for them. As the foster parent, you can advocate for them in lots of different ways. You have to be their voice because, as we've talked about, they've been traumatized. They've been through a number of different situations. They may have been through a number of different homes. They may not have a trust for adults, and they may not be comfortable speaking up. Or when they do speak up, they're speaking out of those feelings that we've talked about. They may be speaking in anger, and so they're not heard. So it turns to you as the caregiver, as the treatment provider, and as their advocate to be the one to speak up. Effective advocacy. How many of you consider yourselves an advocate? Yeah. Have you had to go to a school on behalf of your foster child? The one system all kids go through, the one where they get identified the most. Okay, how about in court? Mm-hmm. So you find yourself being an advocate in lots of different ways. But what does advocacy mean? It means knowing who's involved with the child, and it could be a variety of different systems. Our kids come to us in lots of different ways. for lots of different reasons. Could be school, mental health services. Sometimes you have to speak up to their case manager about some of the things that are going on. Case managers have high caseloads. They're trying to get them down. A lot of kids to keep up with. Sometimes a lot of those details can fall between the cracks because of the amount of information. So it's up to you to be the holder of that information. You need to know what their role is in providing services. For example, you wouldn't call the therapist if a child has broken their probation. You'd call the probation officer. So it's important to know who's involved with that child, but also what their role is. Part of being an effective advocate is identifying what the child and the youth needs. You want to know what their goals are. The department will have goals for them. You will have goals for them, but what is it that they want? Do they just want to be in one place for a while? You know, do they want to be in one school for a while where they might actually be able to be on the track team, actually go to a dance, know their friends for more than one grade? I mean, some of these kids have been bounced around. What are their goals? And then you also need to be part of the steps to accomplish that. No matter how long a child is in your home, you play a role. I think we've heard quite a bit from everybody that you are a change agent. You may be the person who plants a seed for a child who will grow up and be a pediatrician. You know, you may be the person that plants the seed that when that child is in a situation where they are considering making a really bad choice, they may think back to you and go, oh, she would really get me if I did that. Effective advocacy also means ensuring that the youth's perspective, particularly the teenagers, their strengths and their feelings are considered, and they're part of every single plan. If it's the school plan, if it's their permanency plan, if it's their medication management plan, you have to make sure that their perspective is involved, and particularly their strengths. We live in a deficit-based system. I think we've got a lot of efforts to make it more strengths-based, but we always look at what the child doesn't have, what the youth doesn't have, or what's wrong. We need to also be looking at what they do have. Think about the kids that have been from home to home to home. They're resilient. They're still alive. They do have goals. They do have strengths. There may be a budding artist in your home. There may be someone who can run as fast as the wind but has never had track shoes or the ability to be on the track team. There could be a football player. How many people have seen The Blind Side? Yeah, you never know. So it's going to be up to you to make sure that they, as individuals, are considered in every plan. That's what being an advocate is. It's also important that you speak up when agreements aren't honored with those children. I think someone said, do what you say you're going to do. If I'm going to pick you up at 3, I'm going to be there at 3. When someone doesn't follow through, speak up. There's a way to do that that's not aggressive, but it's assertive. You're holding people accountable. A lot of times plans aren't followed for lots of reasons. Very rarely is it because someone doesn't want to or they don't care. There's always a reason for that. But you need to speak up and make sure that that child's feelings are considered, their perspectives considered, and what they were told was going to happen happens. Because a lot of times they've been let down. People have told them they're going to do things, they're going to protect them, they're going to keep them safe. Or they're expected that certain adults are going to do that, and it hasn't happened. So not only do you need to speak up when that happens, but also be very solution-focused. Be part of correcting that, making a solution for it. Different ways about being an effective advocate. Gather your facts and your information. When kids come to you, what type of information do you have? You don't really end up knowing a whole lot of their history. Sometimes the department is still gathering information about their history. Some of our kids are very, very complicated. So make sure you have facts and information. One of the things that I suggest is developing a notebook for each one of your children that's in your home that has basic information, the schools they've been to, if they're under an IEP. And you have to sort of be an investigator sometimes as an advocate to find out that information. It may not just come to you. Make sure you have all the releases signed that you can get all that stuff. The other thing I suggest is when you do that notebook, put a picture of that child on the front with them smiling. Because you're going to see lots of times they're not smiling. Or they're throwing a lamp at you, Or they're yelling or they're screaming, or all you see is the back of them as they're heading out the door. Put a picture of them smiling so that you remember what you're advocating for. Again, know how decisions are made and by whom. What role do people play who are involved with that child? Also, knowing if anyone has dealt with the special education system in the schools, knowing that children with disabilities, they're entitled to appropriate services, not necessarily the best services. At Tennessee Voices, we hear a lot about that, but I want my child to have this thing that is offered in California. Well, it's not offered here in Tennessee, but there are lots of things that will fulfill that need. Be proactive and plan. Know what the child needs. Know what your objective is. Particularly asking the child what he or she wants before you go into any meeting. Being an advocate means building relationships. You are the person who is the bridge between what this child needs, what this child wants, what this child's goal is, and the providers who can get that. So you have to picture yourself as the person who's building that relationship. So that means you have to consider all their perspectives. Consider the school teacher's perspective, who has 28 other kids in her class. Consider the perspective of the mental health provider, the therapist, who may only have that 45 minutes, and then is scheduled back to back. Having worked in a mental health center, you got 15 minutes to get your notes in, and here comes the other kid. You got to switch gears. You also need to know the perspective of the child for whom you're going to be speaking. Always identify common ground. I think everyone's in here, we established from the very beginning. Before we ever started, Jan said, we're all in here because we want to help improve the lives of children. That includes everybody who might be sitting around a table in a child and family team for that child. Don't be afraid to ask for explanations of terms or acronyms. Depending on what system you're going into, everybody speaks a different language. Even now, having done this for about 15 years, I'll be sitting in a meeting. I was in D.C., and they were speaking. There's some people from SAMHSA and from the Federal Department of Education, and they were using these acronyms, and they were using these terms and these rules that they have, and I had no idea. I just said, I'm sorry, I don't work in SAMHSA. Can you tell me what that means? And they're like, oh, yeah. So don't be afraid to ask that. Make sure you get everything in writing. If you were going to purchase a house or purchase a car, and somebody promised you a certain interest rate, wouldn't you want that in writing? That way, when that agreement is not fulfilled for some reason, you have your backup. It's the same thing for any of these kids. If you're going to be an effective advocate for them, you have to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row for them, because one of your roles is as their advocate. Be a problem solver and always emphasize solutions. It is so easy to sit back and say, well, they just didn't do this, or I really wish that teacher would do that. Be the person who says, yeah, that's not going well, but what can we do to make it better? There's nothing worse than sitting in a meeting where everyone gripes, but nobody comes up with a solution. That's very frustrating for me. I'm more of a problem solver, and I like things to keep moving. So I'm always the one that says, okay, so what can we do? I don't want to talk about it anymore. Let's do something about it. These children don't have that kind of time. I mean, every day could be a new day in their life in which you can be part of that change as an advocate. So, being a foster parent is really rewarding. I want to echo exactly what was said earlier. I'm honored to be in this room with you guys. As a parent myself of a child who has some pretty serious anxiety issues, it can be frustrating. I mean, there are days I'd rather throw that ball at my daughter than deal with it. So it can be very rewarding, though, when you see the change that happens. But it's also exhausting, physically and emotionally. So it's very important that you take care of yourself. So I want to switch gears for a minute, and I want to talk about you. We've talked a lot about what you can do for kids. My daughter's therapist asked me to come in and ask her to come out of the room at our last appointment. And I sat down, and like I said, my daughter has anxiety issues. I sat down, and I said, so how's she doing? She's like, well, I don't really want to talk about her. Let's talk about you for a second. Are you stressed? Well, yeah. I travel quite a bit, 2 kids at home, trying to be super mom, I'm assistant director of a statewide organization. I got a lot going on. She said, when you're stressed, she's stressed. What do you do to take care of yourself? Because you can model that for her. So for a minute, I want you to focus on you. I want you to think about, to be the best foster parent you can be, how do you take care of yourself? This is usually how I look. I'm pretty tired when I get home. Research shows that when caregivers have a planned respite time, in whatever way that looks like, whatever that is for them individually, there are less incidents of abuse, neglect, and placements outside the home. What does that tell us? That you got to take care of yourself if you're going to be a good caregiver. That gives us a license to have me time. And that means something different for everybody. No need to feel guilty about it. It's actually encouraged, and it makes you a better foster parent. So let's talk about taking care of you. Here are just some suggestions. Exercise, eat healthy, get enough sleep. Much easier said than done. How many got 8 hours last night? No, well, I'm jealous. How many had a good breakfast this morning? How many of you had caffeine? I see, more hands went up for that. One of the things that was mentioned earlier about structure, when you provide structure for the children in your home, you're also providing structure and time for you. Setting a regular bedtime so that you make sure you get enough sleep. Not everybody needs 8 hours. I know it's recommended. I can go on about 6, but it eventually catches up to me. Structure that time so that you have a little bit of me time. That structure helps them, and it helps you, and you're modeling something for them. Stay in touch with your spouse or partner. Again, easier said than done. I will go a couple of days with only seeing my husband in passing. You know, as I'm handing clothes for the little one and then getting the dance bag for the bigger one, you know, we may be passing. We may work opposite shifts. So one of the things that we do, we can't always do a date night, but we have our time. We have decided there are certain TV shows we like to watch, and so we've told our girls, this is our time. This is our hour, and this is what we're going to do. And we close the door, and we just hang out. You know, we may watch the shows, we may talk, we may sleep. You know, but we set that aside a time to talk. We also make sure that we text each other throughout the day, which is something that's been helpful, because it may just be something funny, because in our house, things get so hectic, and sometimes our 11-year-old, her anxiety's up here, the wind's blowing outside, so there must be a tornado, we're all going to die. I mean, you know, that type of thing that keeps ratcheting up, and I want to throw the ball at her. You know, it's very important that he and I also have some humor, and we're able to talk to each other and connect as adults. Keep in touch with your friends and your support system as well, whatever that may look like. Maintain interests outside the home and work. Something non-work related. Like what? The gym. Exercise is a great outlet. Church. When you're doing this type of work, faith-based is always a good thing. That whole praying for patience thing. Anything else? I go paint pottery. Sometimes I take the kids, sometimes I don't. You have to find something that is good for you that has nothing to do with work that you just don't think about. Schedule time with your children, your family, and your friends. Put it on your calendar and stick to those dates. It's so easy to it's very easy on a Saturday when it's been like today. I'm supposed to go to the Predators game tonight with my family. I'm tired. There's a yard sale this morning. I was up baking last night. You know, it's been a very long week. I've been back and forth across the state. It would be so easy for me to say, y'all go. I'm just going to rest. And in some ways that would be respite, a quiet house. How often does that happen? But it's very important for me to connect with them.
I'd be willing to sit in for you.
Well, that's funny. One of the last things my husband said before I walked out the door is, yes, you're going to the game with me tonight. Because he knows I would have a tendency not to do that. But, you know, I'll keep that in mind in case I change my mind. You also need to use resources for regularly scheduled respite. to allow time to recharge your batteries. You should have access to some type of respite, whether it's a couple of hours, whether it's for an entire weekend, something to get away from the normal stresses of your work as a foster parent. Do you have access to that? If not, advocate for it. All those things we were talking about, it all applies to self-care. Talk to Department of Children's Services. Talk to your whoever foster agency that you're with. Talk to each other and give each other breaks, even if it's 30 minutes. What we have is 30-minute rule in my house. If I've had a rough day, I come in and I say 30 minutes, 30 minutes. And we've established in our family, and even my 11-year-old says this, 30 minutes, Mom, 30 minutes. And you're left alone for those 30 minutes. It's good to set that up where you have your regularly respite time, or you have a cue where people know in your home that that's your break time. Now, is that perfect? No. I mean, we are dealing with children who have been through a lot of emotional trauma, physical trauma, and sometimes they're not able to, as we were talking about, able to calm down, and you have to be that person. But after that's over, take your time. You're not only helping yourself, you're modeling that for them. Maintain your friendships and your support systems. One of the things that we hear from parents on a regular basis, after they have had some type of support, after they have good plans in place, they've been proactive, they're like, wow, my friends actually want me to come over now with my kid. I feel like I'm part of the community again. You can actually sit through an entire service at church. It's important that you maintain friendships and the support systems. Even when things are not going well, understand, that goes back to understanding those different perspectives, that may be rough on some of them, but your support system will hang around. Find other foster parents who understand the joys of struggling and fostering. Support groups. Are you guys part of any? Oh, we got to talk. One of the most effective ways to charge your batteries is to be with people who understand what you've been through. Support groups are extremely helpful. Develop and maintain your own self-care plan and stick to it. Even when it's hard, you are modeling that for the kids that are living in your home. You're modeling for them, especially, how many have teenagers in their home? What John was talking about earlier, being able to self-regulate, you're modeling for them how important it is for someone to take care of themselves, particularly if they have a mental health diagnosis. It's extremely important that they know what their triggers are, that they know what their cues are. So when they start getting burned out, just like you, because it happens, they'll know they need to take some time for themselves. It's so important that you model that. Any questions for me? Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. That was very helpful. And I have a follow-up question. I think that's kind of going to be Debbie Duke related. I'm interested because Millie was talking about how we sometimes don't know a lot of information about children that, come into our care. And sometimes the department is learning this at the same time you're learning this. And then there happen to be behavioral issues with the child. And what is the first thing when a parent starts to see developmentally or behaviorally differences in a child, or the child's struggling and they can't regulate and they know they need outside support? Debbie, where do they start this process?
The first step. Okay, the first step would be to go to your primary care physician, because a lot of the behavioral problems that you see may be related to physical issues, and so you want to really rule out any medical problems that might be going on first. The primary care physician then may possibly, if there's no medical condition there, will then likely refer you to one of the behavioral health providers in the area. In your seat, there's a handout of the community mental health centers that are covered by the TennCare Select plan, and you can get an appointment there and have an assessment through one of those agencies to see what's going on and let one of the professionals there evaluate your child there. Do you want me to go on into the assessment stuff?
You
Or do
know, I would, because
Okay.
what I was really interested in was picking up on what you had said in an earlier workshop, because I thought it tied into this so well, what Millie was saying in terms of advocating for our children. The kinds of information that the resource parents need to be able to bring into that assessment.
Okay. Before you go to the primary care physician, it's going to be really important to gather some information. And what Millie said, you're the best advocate for your child. So you're going to have to be the one to do this. Gather as much information you can about the behaviors that you're seeing, when they happen, who they happen with. Do they happen with you, or do they happen with your husband or wife? Do they happen with one of the other children in your home? Do they only happen at home, or do they happen at school? Where do these behaviors happen? Do they happen when you ask them to do something they don't want to do, or do they happen every time you ask them to do something? Those things are real important to these providers that you're going to be going to, because it helps them pinpoint what issues are going on. Is it related to them being around other children? Is it related to them being by themselves? You know, again, we talked about triggers in a lot of these other conversations. If the trauma trigger is the fact that older children came around them, or is this behavior due to a trigger? You know, there's just so many different things, and it's a puzzle to put together to see what's going on. So, you know, it's good to kind of keep a journal of when these behaviors are happening, what types of behaviors are going on. Are they all over the map, or is it just specific behaviors? And keep that, because you're going to have to give that information to a lot of different people. So you don't want to have to keep reinventing it every time you go. Pick 2 or 3 or 4 main things that bother you. Yeah, you may not like the toothpaste, the lid being off the toothpaste, but that's probably not your primary concern, okay? Pick your battles and identify maybe the top 3 or 4. My husband leaves the top off the toothpaste all the time. It drives me crazy. But that's not my top concern, okay? But same way with your kids. Pick the top concerns and focus on those. Keep a few days, look at when they're happening. Plus, it makes you focus on when this is going on and what you need to work on. What have you tried that didn't work? You know, have you tried rewarding? Have you tried consequences? What things didn't work? Rule out the medical piece, and then when they refer you to the community mental health center, you don't need to have an appointment. You can call. That list has the ones that are going to be in your areas. It's divided by regions. You can call. They should be able to get you in a couple of weeks. Take that information with you and give that to the person doing the intake at that area. Your primary care physician may be good enough and may be comfortable enough to go ahead and say, hey, I think I know what's going on, and they may be able to treat them. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. It just depends. The assessment portion at the community mental health center, they're going to ask you a lot of questions. They may give you some checklists to fill out of behaviors and things that are going on. Go to your school teacher. Like Millie said, you need to have a relationship with the teachers at school, and maybe you do have one. If you're having behavior problems at school, you probably have one. They should be willing to help you with that if you tell them what you need it for and that you're going to try to get some help. Get them to write you a letter or some documentation of what's going on at school and what behaviors are happening at school. Take that information with you. And then you'll meet with one of the counselors at the mental health center. You'll give them that information, and they then will probably set up additional appointments with you. You may see somebody else later. It doesn't all happen at one time at the first appointment, so you need to be ready for that. That assessment is different than a psychological evaluation. The Center of Excellence where Dr. Ebert works, they have a full psychological team that can do specialized psychological evaluations. The community mental health centers also have psychologists at some of those who can do psychological testing. You may get psychological testing at school. So if you don't understand what people are saying is going to happen and you don't know what's happening next, then ask questions like Millie was saying a while ago. It just depends on everything's individualized, so it depends on what's going to happen next. Eventually, depending on the behaviors and what's going on, you probably will get to a physician, to a psychiatrist, or you may get to a psychiatrist. It just depends on if the determination is that your child needs to be on some sort of medication. You should continue to get some individual therapy if it's warranted, and some family therapy with you and the child. I would suggest that you insist on some family therapy so that you can be involved. It's not just the child, it's a family situation, okay? It's not just fixing the child. You need to be a part of that. And if you have other children in the home, then having the siblings and the other kids is important. It just makes your child feel like part of the family as well. And then again with the medication services. So that's compressed.
That's a very good overview. I think what sometimes we wonder, why does it take so long to diagnose a child? Does somebody want to try to answer that question for me?
Can I add something real quick? I just wanted to add, because you'd mentioned the testing at the school. You won't get a diagnosis out of that. The testing at the school that's done is to assess whether there's something going on with the child that's impeding their education. So if that full psychological to get the diagnosis is something that you need to go through a mental health professional for. And the more information you give them, the better, because that's where the diagnosis comes from. It's based on symptoms. And the only way that any psychologist, psychiatrist is going to know those symptoms is the information that you bring to them, that you tell them about when things happen during the day and what the reactions are and what types of behaviors are of concern. Does this child need to make sure that every window and door is locked 2 and 3 times before they go to bed? I mean, that's very important information that leads to the diagnosis. Gathering information about what is going on with the child across every setting that they're in. The more information, the better. And that's what I love about the COE, where Dr. Ebert works. They are so comprehensive, and they listen to you as the parent, as the caregiver, because you will know this child better than the teacher, better than the therapist, because you see them 24/7. You see them across every setting. So I wanted to say that, but
I think actually that was really well put. I'm not going to add much to that other than remember that diagnosis is, if I could give any advice to you all about the importance of developing a relationship with your provider over time. Diagnosis is not something you talk during that first meeting, and yep, this is the diagnosis, your child's depressed or has an anxiety problem. Now, we can start to formulate initial impressions about a diagnosis, and certainly even a psychological evaluation can say, I think your child is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or some other disorder. But really, the best diagnosis is watching a child and the family over time. Many of you, I'm sure, have collected documents from a child's past, and you've wanted to come to someone and go, what's the right diagnosis? They've been diagnosed with every diagnosis across the board. Usually what that means is that possibly that during that particular observation, the symptoms seem to look more like a mood disorder. And during a hospital stay, it looked like a major depressive disorder with
maybe even some psychotic features. So you'll say, well, which one was it? Diagnosis is very kind of an evolving piece, and it's pretty complicated at times, and it can be very confusing at times. And I think what I would say is that it's really meaningful and helpful to bring the child and develop a relationship with that provider. And if you have questions about diagnosis, ask those questions. Bring them before the provider. We always, at the Center of Excellence, encourage your first step to be, have you communicated your concerns with that particular provider about diagnosis? Let's get their documentation. So I actually want to add one thing to what Millie's presentation was today. I can't tell you how many times the Center of Excellence has consulted on a case where foster parents have been involved, and we've talked 90 minutes about the kids' problems. And it's endless about what we could try to accomplish around getting the right services in place, the right evaluations. Inevitably, when I turn and I ask the partners, how are you doing? Almost every time, it's almost like they're holding back from saying, we're not making it, we're struggling. And I would say to you all, one of the best things that you can do to help with your child's mental health, with their success and everything that we've talked about today, is investing in being proactive in your relationships. Whether that's family relationships, partner relationships, it's essential. You can almost see the trajectory with partners who are supporting each other, encouraging each other, and are proactive in taking care of the relationship. Because if you don't, their issues will tsunami you. They will overwhelm you. And so it's kind of, that would be the one thing I'd encourage you, and I really appreciate that Millie spent some time just saying, this is important. And I want to second that, very important, so.
Thank you. Questions, follow-up? Yes.
I have a question. As a foster parent, when I've had my children be a part of counseling, I've never had them come and ask me what issues were for the week. You know, I've called and I've said, you know, I want to make the counselor aware of this. Can you have them call me? Never have I had that person, when I bring that child in for the counseling, pull me aside and ask me. They just say, we're going to talk to them about that. And it was almost like I felt devalued that my opinions about what happened in that scenario were being insightful for that. And I kept pushing, but it was like they were saying, now, we've got this, we're the professionals. And I'm thinking, I'm spending much more time with this child than you are, and you're not seeming to understand. I'm getting a reading about this, and you're not valuing it. So how do you go about making that, and at what point do you say, I need a different provider, you're not listening?
I'm going to speak to that. One of the things that Mary Beth talked about, I'm an advocate. I have no problem speaking up. One of the things, it's a national movement, is for parents, caregivers, with that lived experience that you're talking about, being seen as professionals and entering the professional realm. As I said, the majority of my staff are parents. And although I have a degree in clinical psychology, I've learned more from them because they've lived it, you know, and now I'm living it. You know, you have value, and you are the one that's going to carry the most information. This is where advocacy comes in. You have a right to speak up. As the caregiver, you have a right to be involved in the treatment. And I'm not going to talk about the legalities of all that. I'm going to leave that for somebody else. But the things that you can do, put your requests in writing. We have a number of free trainings with TVC taught by other parents about just how to navigate those different systems and what you can do and what your rights are and how to build the relationship, because that is a key piece of advocacy, but also be heard and be seen as an equal participant. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the whole system of care philosophy, or family-driven care. Families are equal partners in the treatment of their children. You are the ones that are the most invested. So what I would say is put it in writing. If necessary, leave it on voicemail, send it by email, send a letter, copy it with somebody else, particularly if schools, I know we're not talking about a school, but particularly with schools, copy it, have a CC list at the bottom of that letter. You have a right to speak up, and you can also, one of the things that's been helpful is I schedule an appointment separately. And just say, I know that you're my child's therapist, but I need to talk to you about what's going on and how can I better help that? Because whatever they're learning in therapy, if you don't know about it, you can't support it at home. And if you say that to the provider, it's going to click whatever's not clicking, and it's probably nothing intentional. But I was trained in school that I was the professional, and so, you sit out here, and I'll go in here and I'll do the therapy. That's just not really how it works in reality. So speak up.
Yes.
I've had all types of situations. I refuse, I'm loud enough, I may not need that.
Well,
I'm a school teacher, so I'm used to, I refuse to be, how you say, if I'm with this child 24/7, I am your eyes and your ears. And what I say, what I witness, I'm very observant, is very important. When I take my child to the therapist, I always ask if you want me to come in. Now, if there is something that's been done that week that I really feel that I need to be in on, we go in together. We go in together. I don't entertain not going. I don't. That's not even an option, because I'm there to make sure this child gets what he deserves, one way or the other. One way or the other. So, it just depends. And I find it most beneficial when we go together. When we go together, he'll say his part, and then he'll look at me, want me to say my part, and I said, well, no, I think you need to go and comment on that, son. You need to share that, because that came from you. And it's been, I don't know to do it any other way. Any other way. And I don't know who those therapists were.
Okay, she is asking the follow-up question that was asked that we didn't quite answer. And that is, when do we change therapist? Or is it ever appropriate to change therapist?
Yes, I think that the answer to that question is it's really, I think, exhausting a process. I think one of the first steps is to, as Malia was saying, address it directly with the therapist first. To go and say, I'm concerned, maybe I'm missing something, I want to be open to this. Maybe you have a reason why this has to be the way it's arranged, but I'd like to understand that. Every therapist should be able to respond to that with some level of rationale. If they can't give you a rationale, that's a concern. The second thing that you can do is, even if a therapist is licensed, or a psychologist, there's usually a clinical director that's at that particular agency. If you've exhausted a direct, open communication with that provider, one of the next steps that you can take is, I'd like to talk with the clinical director. And again, I think some people jump straight to that part, and it usually, I would say, I would encourage that first step, because that can really bring about some neat things, not only for you, but and the therapist can say, I really felt like I was focusing so much, thank you for letting me know, giving them that opportunity. But I think if you exhaust that process and you're still out, I think that that's worth kind of exploring a different treatment relationship. I have to say, in my experience, I'm trying to think of a condition or disorder where the parent involvement would be not in the child's best interest, and I can't think of many. So that would be an extremely rare situation that you would not be involved. And in fact, most family therapists would say, good therapy, so those of you that have participated in family therapy, good family therapists graduate themselves out of the family. They work with you and they empower you so that they can step back and allow you to do the work. I think that if you're not getting that experience, then it's reasonable to go explore possible different relationships.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
I don't need the mic, I don't
Well-
think. I've had some wonderful experience with therapists. I've always been asked to, voice my opinion. I've always been asked to tell what I see. But then I have a little problem. Right now, I'm trying to get a report that's already been done on a child. And the severeness of it is because he's 2, going on 3, and he's had an evaluation at Vanderbilt. And since August the 10th, we've been trying to get that evaluation sent to DCS or, and could you enlighten me on what's taking so long? What's the problem?
Sure, I'll speak to that. I don't, so there's many reasons why possibly a formal report would take a long time to get back. I think keep in mind a couple things about evaluations. First of all, most psychologists who conduct the evaluations are able to probably give some impressions about what are the needs for the child within a period of time that shortly after even the evaluation, the day that they did it. I say that because a lot of people wait for the report, but you can certainly call and say, we're trying to move forward with regards to this specific question. Could we talk a little bit before even the report is available to get some insight or direction around that? But there are multiple reasons why a report would take a period of time to get out. Sometimes, as people were talking about, obtaining collateral information, obtaining historical records to support some of the findings in the report, some of the scoring pieces. Again, I can't say I know the specifics around this question, but it's okay to ask, where are we at with that, and what can we expect in terms of a timeline around that?
Would it take a year?
No, it shouldn't take a year.
That's what I'm saying. Everybody has been trying to get there.
Yeah.
Who now do I,
Why don't you, I would be more than happy to connect with you after and be able to find out, and we can kind of problem solve that. Okay.
I kind of have a follow-up question somewhat related, and that is, she had a very young child that was evaluated. And the child is, growing, there's developmental things. And I'm wondering if the list of diagnoses that we sometimes see with children who, have been in the foster care system are also related to what people are finding out, and then the developmental stage of the child and the different things they're encountering. I mean, why is it that they get a whole list of diagnoses?
So, why are there multiple things? Kind of as I was sharing with you all before, even though a child has been through, say, maltreatment or abuse in their past, it doesn't always mean that they develop, say, a full-fledged post-traumatic stress disorder, even though that would be the natural, wow, this child's been through a lot. I think that at times you'll notice some clinicians put down diagnosis to rule them out, or to consider a mood disorder, or consider possibly that this child is dealing with depression or another type of anxiety disorder. You'll see ADHD, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. These are all disorders that we will see on a regular basis with foster care kids because of the historical problems that they've had and the current presenting symptoms. I think the best way to kind of engage that list is just to sit down with a provider and say, can you explain to me, they're all listed, why is that? And what can we expect in terms of when we're doing treatment together? How do we address those? And you can take those one at a time. That makes sense. That's reasonable.
Thank you. Questions?
Just wanted to say another thing about diagnoses. You know, I think a formal diagnosis is important, but it also we don't need to wait for that in order to begin to know some of the things we need to do for our kids. I mean, we've talked a lot about what we know about trauma and how it affects kids. And we can know about that child's history, and we can know what ages that they experience their trauma, and we can know that that's going to impact them developmentally. Kathy's presentation about the things that we can begin to work on by unpacking or repacking that suitcase, there's a lot that we can do based simply on what the child's experience has been and how we all know that trauma impacts that child. And working with a good therapist and somebody who can kind of look at some history and do that kind of assessment can point us in the right direction, even if we don't have the formal diagnosis yet.
Anyone have any follow-up questions? Yes.
Miss Millie, I just wanted to say that's just great information. I understand, and I think it's inherent, the caregiving part and the treatment provider part, and my wife and I really take a lot of pride in being the advocate. My problem is being the advocate sometimes is hard when you have a governmental agency that really works against you. And I don't want to badmouth DCS, but it is what it is. So I'd like to hear more about Tennessee Voices and see if that could be another avenue for me and my wife to reach out to get some help. Because sometimes we seem like it feels like we're beating our head up against the wall. We do spend all the time with the child, and we see all these things that need to be done. We chronicle things very, very methodically, and we present those writings to them, and sometimes it doesn't, it doesn't hit the right ear. So maybe Tennessee Voices is the way to go. So if you could tell us a little bit more about your organization.
Okay. Well, before I talk about Tennessee Voices for Children, I just want to say that every system that kids have to go through are very complicated. And every system has things that are functional and things that aren't functional. I mean, it's just like there are people that do their jobs and people that don't do their jobs, and you can find that in any workplace, anywhere. The thing to keep in mind is that most people get into this to help and then may find themselves caught up in bureaucracy that might be there. So that being said, that's where the role of the advocate comes in. I get a little passionate about this. I have a great sense of right and wrong. What we do at Tennessee Voices for Children is provide that voice. We are there for parents of kids who have emotional and behavioral disorders. We do everything from individual one-on-one advocacy, going to meetings with you. Sometimes having an advocate come in can make things look differently. For example, we have had families that we've worked with that have been struggling to get what their kid needs in school. The school system has a lot of barriers, especially if you have a child who has multiple needs, and they're trying to deal with lots of kids at the same time. After many meetings, the family requested that we come in. So just having someone go, my advocate didn't even have to say anything. She just came in with her notebook that says IDEA law on it and sat down, but met with the family ahead of time to say, this is what you can expect. You can ask for the moon and stars, but expect that you're going to get some good cloud coverage. So I would say maybe having an advocate with you. Their relationships are extremely important. Building that relationship with your DCS case manager and holding them accountable, because they have a boss who has a boss who has a boss. They have a legal mandate to meet the needs of children. And let me tell you, foster parents are in short supply. You are a hot commodity. They're going to want to please you. And that goes for if you work for an agency or if you work for DCS. Mary Beth might want to close her ears. Use that. I'm not saying make threats at all, but just say, for me to be an effective foster parent, this is what I need. I need to do this. I need to have this for this child. So I would say sitting down and talking with someone, and you're more than welcome to call us anytime. We cover all 95 counties. We provide trainings. We have contracts with the Department of Children's Services. I'm not sure, but I can give you a card. I won't give you my Preds tickets, but I'll give you a card. But just, we have contracts with the Department of Children's Services, and entering that contract with them to provide an in-home service, which is family support and a behavioral specialist, going into that negotiation for that contract, we said, and we're going to be advocates. There will be times we won't agree, but we promise you we will always work toward a solution with you, not against you. So relationships, but we'd be happy to help. I'll give you my card.
Tennessee Voices is a great support to the children, the department, the parents. We love working with Tennessee Voices. And I would like to echo, it is important to continue up the chain. I like the way John presented it at the Community Mental Health Center. You start engaging the person that you're connecting with that's responsible, and then if that isn't working, then you just move that up the chain of command, and that certainly applies to the educational system and the Department of Children's Services. One thing we haven't talked about quite yet, we talked about therapy services, we talked about therapy services outpatient primarily, but there are in-home services. And we have someone that has had a good experience with in-home services that I'd like, if they could, just to comment on, because I had a child with autism, and this might help allow some others to kind of learn a little about in-home services. Do you mind sort of telling your story with your 6-year-old?
We adopted two girls, and okay, and the youngest one, she had signs of autism, and she had a little circle that was kind of like her world, and she would just shut down. Just go. You couldn't reach her. And it would happen lots of times. And we had ASAP.
Jason Jordan.
He come to our home once a week, and he sat down, and it's kind of like you said. He started with me and Karen. How are we? How are we dealing with this? What can I do to help Yuns? And then he went with Kelly, one-on-one. Whenever she would shut down with him, he knew exactly what the next step was. And through this, it helped us, because we was kind of at the end. We didn't know where else to go and what else to do. But now, that relationship with Kelly is, it's just unbelievable how much help Jason was for us and her and me and Karen. We raised 4 children of our own, and none of them had any special needs, and it was totally something different to me and Karen, was what Kelly was experiencing, and we'd never been through this, but through Jason taking the time with us.
And that's just like before we reached to the point where we're at right now. She got to a point, she was walking out at nights, and she was just 5, going up the road and not knowing when to return, because she didn't have no safe place to go to. But he helped us connect with her. And now she don't go out at nights. She will holler at me during the middle of the night and say that she needs to go to the bathroom. So I don't worry about her walking and not knowing how to come back. And he's an angel. And if anybody, I'll recommend him to anybody. But she didn't communicate when we first got her. but she communicates now. So, she's right now 6. Yeah.
So, Jan, can you tell us a little about ASAP? I know that's a program that you've worked with before.
Well, there are 2 programs, and Family and Children's Service has Connecting Kids program, and that is in-home services as well, and it's by contract. And it's primarily used for children that are on an adoption track, but not necessarily. They're children that have therapeutic reasons that they can't get to permanency. And our work is always it's in the home, it's family-centered. You know, there are times when you focus your work with the child, there are times when you focus the work with the parent, but it's all very family-oriented. And it's kind of like the ASAP program prior to adoption. What is wonderful about ASAP is it's available to families after the adoption is finalized. And it is the only program like that that's funded and it's free for families that have adopted after the adoption. And so we work with a similar philosophy that we're building the attachment, we're addressing trauma, and the Connecting Kids program is prior to an adoptive finalization, and ASAP is after. So ASAP stands for Adoption Support and Preservation. We're really talking attachment support and preservation. So that's everybody who has an adopted child should know about ASAP. And this is also available, I mean, if you adopted your child 5 years ago and there are issues that are showing up, ASAP is still available for that.
Thank you, Jan. And the Centers of Excellence are also available for children who have been adopted and are now experiencing symptoms and having concerns that had previously not been identified. Children can be seen at the Center of Excellence as well if their cases become complex. And that referral can be made through the Department of Children's Services. So that's important to know too.
Both Connecting Kids and ASAP work very closely in partnership with the Center of Excellence, because the Center of Excellence does the most wonderful assessments that really address, you know, some psychologicals are looking strictly at a diagnosis. When you're working with the Center of Excellence, they're really looking at the deeper issues. They're understanding the trauma issues, they're understanding attachment issues, and giving a lot of support to the therapists then who are going to carry out that kind of work. So that partnership is really positive.
So that's one kind of in-home services, and I'd love to hear the in-home services from Tennessee Voices, your program, and then also have Kathy comment too.
Okay, I just wanted to say something about your story. It's the perfect example of someone who has been clinically trained, working directly with families who are the experts on the kid that's in their home. That's that partnership I was talking about earlier, because you have expertise, and as clinicians we have expertise, and when we combine those, you see what happens. It's very powerful. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's how it should work. Yes, that's kids don't come with manuals. I have looked and looked, and I haven't found one yet. I haven't found the off switch either. There's lots of on switches. But that's just an important thing, and I think that's one of the things with in-home services that you really get, because it is more of a comprehensive look at what's going on, and it helps you learn, and it helps the child learn, and as clinicians, we learn too. I've learned something from, I think the battery died. Is it back on? Oh, I think I've learned something from every family I've worked with. Our in-home service actually pairs a family support provider, which is a parent or a caregiver who has been through different systems successfully with their own child or their foster child. Sometimes it's their sibling. And brings that life experience and also that hope to families who may be at the point where I just can't do this anymore. And it's someone that you can really talk to because they've been there and done that, got every T-shirt. Pairs it with a behavioral specialist who works on therapeutic skill building, both with the family, with the child, at school, on the weekends, in the community, with the football coach, with the youth pastor, doing behavioral things, behavioral techniques, working with the family on communication, and that's our family connection program, our in-home model. But we also do family support, which is just the family support provider working in the home or in whatever setting is the issue for that family. So that's what we provide.
And that service it can be covered either sometimes by contract with the Department of Children's Services, but it's also covered through the TennCare program, really on a case-by-case basis.
For right now.
The TennCare program approves that service.
They do.
And it is, so it's can be requested and approved.
You request it from your DCS case manager, who will then talk with TennCare Select, and then they will contact us to develop that individual contract.
The department contracts with several private providers. I heard you mention Centerstone, and OmniVisions is one of those too, and there's other agencies. And I think, you know, the in-home work that we do is we have case managers who have small caseloads. Staff at our program are working with, you know, 7 or 8 families. And that allows them to be available 24/7 for real. That allows them to build, I hate to use the cliche, it takes a village to raise a child, but that's what we do. You know, we look at each foster family, and if you need respite, if we need to have a mentor assigned to the child, if we need somebody coming in and working with on educational issues. So our approach to helping families, our foster families, is to do a wraparound support services based on you and the child in your home, and you know, what kinds of support you need. So we try to really individualize things. We have some families who need respite very, very often. We have other families who don't want respite, but they might need a therapist coming into the home and helping their birth children adjust to being, having foster children in the home. So a lot of ours is individualized and making sure that we're hearing what it is that you feel like you need to be successful. And I think, you know, another thing over the years, you know, the level of acuity of the children has changed. I mean, I've been doing this, you know, more years than I want to admit to. And, you know, even at, you know, my program, we've always had difficult children. But I'm telling you, all the kids are difficult children now. And our constant challenge is, and we use the word, you know, what tools can I give to our foster parents, and what tools can I give to our staff to help them meet the needs of the kids that are so much more difficult than what we used to work with 20 years ago. And so, yeah, it's a challenge. But, you know, I want to encourage you guys, don't give up. I like the concepts about the chain of command. I mean, that's how I train my staff. If you go to the first supervisor and you don't get an answer, then you go to the second one. You know, you don't get the right answer from, we can't wait on answers for these kids. I'm not willing to wait. These kids have already been waiting, and I'm not willing to wait 2 weeks for a child and family team meeting to be scheduled. And so, you know, not giving up, going up the chain of command, calling on folks, you know, like the folks at, you know, Tennessee Voices, calling on, you know, the leadership within your agency. And in fact, you know, I train my staff, and you'll have to pardon my language here, but if somebody's not kind of pissed off at you, you're probably not doing a very good job advocating. And I mean that with the kindest definition of the word I just said. But you get what I'm saying? I mean, really, we've got to be advocating, whether it's for permanency, for kids to have more frequent visits. Don't give up. Keep on asking until you find somebody who actually steps up to the plate.
Don't take no for an answer. Absolutely. Questions? Anybody have questions? Comments? All right, you have, great.
Kathy? Yes, ma'am. What's the lady name next?
Millie.
Millie, after we're through, would you go with me to talk to John?
I would
There's an example of advocacy.
I would be happy to be your advocate, but John is an excellent advocate as well.
Very good. All right. Well, you all have been great this afternoon, but we do want to make sure that the basic concepts got answered for you and hopefully learn some things. We do thank you for your time and patience with us this afternoon. So thank you for doing all that you do. Is that it?